call us Bonediggers. The Hell Creek Formation of southeastern Montana was very, very different 70 million years ago than it is today. Today we see an arid, dry badlands full of sagebrush and mudstone and large, dry buttes. Back then it was more like it would have been on the current Carolina coasts. We had wetlands, probably very, very humid, different plants. If you go to the Badlands today, for living reptiles, you'll see rattlesnakes and you'll see horned toads and the occasional turtle and some other kind of snakes and lizards as well, but mostly very arid living animals. If you went to the Hell Creek Formation 70 million years ago, if you went to southeastern Montana, you'd see soft-shell turtles and crocodiles and wading birds and things like that. You'd see a very, very, very different ecosystem because the environment has changed so much. Another good example of what the Hell Creek would have been like, maybe kind of like the Florida Everglades, but without so much grass. It was mostly a big fluvial or a big river floodplain. So lots of muds and lots of trees and ferns and such. Some of the earliest dinosaur remains ever discovered were found by natives to regions, and they were interpreted as dragon bones. Well, they saw these bones that were reptilian in nature, these giant lizard-like animals with claws and long tails and teeth. In fact, in certain parts of the world, such as Central Asia, when they came across bones of an animal that had a beak like a bird and had claws on its hands and feet like a lion and a long reptilian tail, they called it the griffin, actually, or Europeans that heard these legends called it the griffin, but actually it was something called a protoceratops, which is a small beaked dinosaur from the late Cretaceous. So research is primarily the most important aspect of looking for dinosaur bones. Once you've done the research, both in the scientific literature and otherwise, you move out to an area where bones are typically found. And from there, that's where you first start looking for dinosaur bones. When a paleontologist is trying to look for fossil remains, the first thing they want to do is research. Where have bones been found before? Sometimes even asking around local areas, looking in local legend. And then also asking people to come on a dinosaur dig. Usually it's not that hard to do. People would love to do something like this. It's something they've seen on TV and thought it'd be cool. But then when you explain it more that, well, it's 114 degrees, in the shade, which there's none. You're swinging a pick and a shovel all day, moving rock, and you're not necessarily just going to stumble and find a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It gets a little bit more difficult. Well, this is a dinosaur rib. Now, we're not sure what kind of rib or to what dinosaur, but ribs are very common in this area. It's one of the most common bones to find. In order to do this, in order to collect these kind of fossils, you need to get a permit from the federal government, and you have to have a repository set up. So a lot of people think that when we dig up these dinosaur bones that we take them back to Illinois and then we keep them, or we sell them on eBay, God forbid. Actually, what we do is we curate them, we reconstruct them, we study them, and then they go into a federally licensed repository, which in our case is the Burpee Museum of Natural History in Rockford, Illinois. The thing about it, the good thing about it going to a natural history museum is it's there for everybody to learn from, not just whether it goes on display in the museum or not, but it's in the collections. If somebody wants to do research on this specific bone, they can go there and they can do their research on it in a safe environment. To find a good fossil site, you need three things: good eyes, lots of patience, and good boots. It's a lot of walking around in the Badlands. It's a lot of walking around in rough terrain. It's a lot of walking around and getting dehydrated. It's a lot of walking around. What we do is we just spread out and we start walking through these buttes. And we look and see if we find any crumbs of bones that are laying out on the surface. If we see a pile of these, we try to follow it up the hill, follow these crumbs up the hill and see where the source is. In most cases, the entire bone is completely destroyed, lying out on the surface. It just weathered out. And there's really not much you can do with it. We nickname that Junkosaurus because that's pretty much all it is junk. Other times, though, you get lucky and only a little bit of it has weathered out. The rest of it is still going straight back into that hillside. And then you can move up from that and work your way down on top of it. And then if you're really, really, really lucky, there'll be more than one bone there. Though that isn't always the case. Most of the time that we find dinosaur bones, it's just an isolated bone.
I'll be honest, man, I hope there's not a full skeleton back here because I don't know how we're going to get it out of there.
The ones that we spend the most time at, obviously, are bone beds where we have multiple specimens and sometimes multiple animals. Most of the fossils that we're finding in the Hell Creek Formation, as well as other dinosaur formations, are not complete skeletons. They're usually isolated bones. And one of the studies of research that I focus on with this is something called taphonomy, which is trying to understand why is it that sometimes we just have one dinosaur bone and other times we have a complete skeleton. Why are some bones in better shape than others? Taphonomy studies all the processes that can affect an animal's body from the moment it dies to the moment it's discovered, possibly millions of years later as a fossil. In the case with isolated bones, countless things can happen to that animal. Our Triceratops could be walking and he dies, and then maybe he's predated and scavenged, and his bones are scattered all over the place, and maybe only one of them gets buried and preserved, and maybe that's the one that we're finding. Other times, an entire skeleton may be buried very quickly after the animal's death before scavenging takes place. That would give us a more complete skeleton. Also, even if the bone is still buried, but it's buried just to the surface where all the rock has been removed except for just a very thin layer over it, that's still within what we call the weathering zone, which means rainwater can still get in there, ice can form in there in the winter, freeze thaw will weaken its structure, and upon excavating that, essentially you're removing rock and finding bone dust in the shape of a bone. And there's not enough glue in the world to put that together again. So you can't save every fossil, but we try our best.
Is that the same one from Young? That's a different one.
No, that's a different one.
It's a different one.
His other one goes like this.
It's on top of the other one.
Like, where's the other one?
See the
Oh,
tinfoil?
Right
like
here
this.
going this way.
Jesus, Dave. Boy, aren't you just,
Keep it organized.
No, it actually pissed me off because I can't get to the other
how's
one
the condition of that one?
now. A lot better.
Okay, it's not as abraded?
No, it's braided as, yeah, it is a little bit.
They used to use dynamite to excavate dinosaur bones, and the method of that was you see where some bones are sticking out of the hillside, and then there's this giant butte on top of it, maybe sometimes up to 10 meters of rock overlying it, which would be a lot of work to remove. So they'd just drill a couple of pilot holes, they'd shove the dynamite in, and they'd blast the entire hillside. Then they'd send people out with canvas bags to pick up chunks of dinosaur bone that were destroyed and blown all over the Badlands. The real problem with that is the one thing we try to do the most is not break the bones further than they're already broken. This also resulted in a lot of complete almost vaporization of some of the bones. They're just completely obliterated to a point where they can't be reconstructed. So by doing that, they're actually losing more material than they were starting out with. And that was a good example of how speed paleontology doesn't really exist. It is just a long, patient, delicate process.